Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Health and Wellbeing Board. It is Wednesday, the 22nd of January. So welcome, everyone. Everybody should have a copy of the running order in front of them with the timings on. Please just give me a shout if you don't have one or you can't see one. So agenda item 1, apologies for absence. So we have apologies from Zoe Campbell at Tube, who is substituted by David Kerr. Simon Morritt at York Hospital is substituted by Lucy Brown. Sarah Story from City of York Council is substituted by Michael Melvin. And we have apologies from Councillor Ashley Mason and Councillor Bob Webb. Martin Kelly is on his way and running a little bit late, as is Councillor Runciman. Okay, so we move on to agenda item 2. Does anybody have any declarations of interest they need to make? No. Okay, agenda item 3. Is everybody happy to sign off the minutes from the meeting in November and the slightly amended meeting minutes from the September meeting? Does anyone have any questions to raise around those? Nope. Okay, I shall sign those both off then. So we move on to agenda item 4, and that is public participation. We have 2 people who are registered to speak. Each person will have a 3-minute timer, and I will just check if people want a 30-second warning. So the first public speaker we have is Councillor Emily Nelson, who wants to speak on agenda item 10 regarding pharmacy provision, which is in the Chair's report. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Would you like a 30-second warning? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to speak on agenda item 10 and also on the wider remit of this committee in terms of the pharmaceutical needs assessment that the Health and Wellbeing Board is responsible for. A recent application for a change in pharmacy provision in Westfield has really highlighted to myself and Councillor Coles the possibility for some serious loopholes in the way that pharmacy licensing is looked at. So what's become clear is that pharmacies can apply to move, and in applying to move, that actually what they could be doing potentially is severely reducing the pharmacy provision, the hours that pharmacies are open. In this case, a pharmacy would close and hours would reduce in an out of hours pharmacy, but none of this was flagged up because it was all under a pharmacy move that was tagged as officially no significant change. So what this means is I just feel like it was really important for myself to come down and raise this at the Health and Wellbeing Board. In this case, I was really pleased that the Chair and the board were able to put in comments. But I would really like to ask that any applications that are made, pharmaceutical applications that are made like this, could be really scrutinised by the committee and by City of York Council officers. Even if they're flagged as no significant change, I think it's clear that sometimes hidden under that there is a context of significant change to pharmaceutical provision in the city. The other thing that it's really raised is the importance of out-of-hours pharmacy provision, particularly. What actually this application could result in if it goes ahead and if it involved changing the licence for hours for our out-of-hours pharmacy on Cornlands Road in Westfield. What that would mean is a lack of any pharmacy provision outside of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, for a massive chunk of residents in the city in an area that is the most health deprived, is one of the areas of the city with the most health needs. So I think that when you do the pharmaceutical needs assessment, it's not just about the geography. And actually, one of the things is also the geography of the GP surgeries seems to be what's taken into account rather than the geography of residents that are drawing into those GP surgeries. So it's not just about the geography, it's also about the hours of provision, because there are
30 seconds.
Big chunks of the city that don't have out-of-hours provision. And finally, I would really like to call on the Health and Wellbeing Board to, in its sort of official capacity, write to the government, because what lies underneath this is pharmacies do not have a stable funding agreement with the government at the moment, and there's nothing we can do to stop them from being forced to close. So please can we use the voice of the Health and Wellbeing Board to write to the government and urge them to really imminently sort out the issues around pharmacy contracts and pharmacy funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. And I do echo very, very much of that we cannot underestimate the value of pharmacy provision. We will be discussing it in item 10 as part of my report, and I will discuss with Peter the writing to the government. Thank you. So we have Hilary Conroy registered to speak on agenda item 5, which is the Healthwatch report, listening to neurodivergent families in York. Thank you, Hilary. Would you like a 30-second warning? No? Okay. Thank you.
The Healthwatch report being presented today represents many months of work by Vanessa and Kevin at the Land Taxby, Shan and others at Healthwatch York, and myself at the York Disability Rights Forum. I'd like to offer a small correction to Shan's report to the board. I did not hold the focus group. I spoke to each parent individually. Some recorded interviews, some sent voice notes or text when they could steal a few seconds to send me their thoughts. To engage with parents of neurodivergent children, you have to be creative, provide choices, encourage people only to give what they can offer in that moment. They often apologise for not giving more, for not having the time, for not being able to face the topic. Given the amount of emotionally exhausting work these parents are doing day in, day out, we need to remember that talking about it can be too hard, too emotionally disruptive to engage in at times. Some parents had never spoken to anyone honestly about their experiences before. Others were terrified of their identities becoming known due to feeling at risk in systems who might seek revenge if they spoke out openly. I would like us all to recognise the huge emotional and physical toll this report has taken on the parents within it and thank them unreservedly for their time and effort. I hear constantly in meetings like this that we need to seek out unheard and marginalised voices. Well, here they are, honest and raw, so many of them all at once to lay bare the issues they face in the systems that you have power within. No more can these parents be told they are a small minority, that nobody else is having the same issues, that they are unique in their complexities or frustrations, and that ultimately they are the only ones. This report is over 100 pages long and contains multitudes, but strikingly consistent accounts around the challenges the system is presenting. One area that desperately needs to change is how CAMHS engages with paperwork and administration. It is not an isolated few who experience administrative errors, lost forms, removal from waiting lists without knowing. This is the norm and it has to change. It was disappointing to read the ICB's initial response, which felt overly defensive. I want to highlight what I feel is an attempt to gaslight the parents in the report about what support is available. I looked up the services mentioned, and as far as I can see, Autism Central is run by Daisy Chain in many locations, but not in York. Shout is a mental health texting service with limited relevance for this group. York Mind are a wonderful, if completely overstretched resource, but do not have a specific service or cafe for this group. Autism Plus have activities in Sheffield, Knaresborough and Hull, but I could find no mention of any work they do in York. I could find no evidence of the neurodiverse parents group at all, and Castaway Music Theatre is in Goole and somewhat off topic. This is a theme when engaging with our community, asking for our experiences and then saying we are the ones who are uninformed about what is available and giving lists of inaccessible or inappropriate services. What I would suggest is for systems mentioned to let their defensiveness go in the face of this report. I expect our councillors not to allow the conversation to turn to congratulating systems for the work they say they are doing, or attempts to counter or challenge the voices in this report. These parents have asked above all for you to listen, to hear them, to understand and accept that harm is being caused and commit to concrete action to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Thank you for speaking and thank you for reflecting those views of the people within the report who absolutely it is a huge toll upon them to speak about and acknowledge. And I think acknowledgement is such a huge part of this, to acknowledge how it's affecting within the family and looking outwards to the wider support systems. We will be discussing this at item 5 and will take into consideration what's been said. Thank you. Okay, so now we do move on to agenda item 5, which is the Healthwatch York report, listening to neurodivergent families in York. And I welcome Sian to present this report. We have 20 minutes for this item, and this includes the discussion and the presentation. Thank you, Sian.
That's not like me. I normally remember my mic. Apologies, everyone. First and foremost, I want to also start by paying tribute to the families who shared their experiences with us, whether direct or through our amazing partner organisations. I think it is a testament to their desire for others to have a smoother journey to seeing their neurodivergent children thrive, that despite all the challenges they outline in this report, they found the time to write up their experiences, take part in discussions, and speak with us to share those experiences. I also want to express my grateful thanks to those partners, the Land Haxby, York Disability Rights Forum, York Carer Centre and Parent Carer Forum York for trusting us to bring these experiences together and work with them to make sure they're heard and lead to change. Secondly, I want to thank colleagues who took time to respond to the report and apologise again for the very short turnaround time they had at one of the busiest times of the year when many were on leave. I do appreciate that was something of a challenge, and I will try and avoid such things in future. Third, I just want to acknowledge that we around this table are not just here wearing our professional hats, but are also human beings with our own experiences of neurodivergent family members, friends and colleagues. At a time of growing division worldwide, I think it's important to acknowledge this isn't about them and us, we're all us. And I know whilst we are realistic about the significant pressures and challenges on our health and care system, we all share a desire to see our city's young people thrive. This report was challenging to pull together, and it is a difficult read, but I can't apologise for that. If it's hard to read, imagine how hard it is to live. If this report achieves nothing else, sharing these stories is an important step, letting other families know they're not alone. There is a growing community across the UK of individuals and families calling for change. Groups like our partners in the report, like partners from previous work, like York Inspirational Kids, like Empower ED Scotland, a group of 5 mums whose children aren't coping in mainstream education. Like Gemma Tasker at the Pottering Shed, who contacted us seeing the press release about this work. Like Sen Rays in North Yorkshire. Like researchers at Manchester Metropolitan University looking at the risks for young people with SEN regarding modern slavery and exploitation. It highlights that this is not a York-specific challenge, but a national one. In 12 Moons, author Caro Giles says, I've been told repeatedly by health and education professionals that I make my child anxious, some kind of Munchausen by proxy intimation designed to induce fear and confusion, a special type of gaslighting that conveniently conceals the reality. And if we as a system only take one thing from this report, what comes through clearly for me is this. These parents' lives are hard enough. When they reach out for help and support, we need to listen. We need to believe them. We need to recognise their expertise and understanding of their child, and we need to offer what help we can. But I really hope we take much more than one thing from this and join the steadily growing movement for change. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sian. And I absolutely agree. It was a tough read, that report, absolutely tough read. And the experiences in it were absolutely invaluable, and the voices from the people within the report. Would anybody like to speak? Peter?
Add my thanks to Hilary for her contribution, to Sian for the report and everyone that was involved in doing it. I thought I would just set out a process that we're going through at the moment around writing an autism and ADHD strategy for the city. I think it might help the conversation a little bit in terms of taking some of this forward and fixing some of these things, although there are some really major challenges in this, and I don't think any of us are under any illusions. A strategy straight away fixes things. But for the benefit of the rest of the committee, this is something that has been discussed at council's scrutiny, and council have taken this through a couple of discussions and will continue to act as a really good public challenge, I think, actually, to this process. We have pulled together a group of people to take a process through, which starts off with a conversation around listening, and actually this report couldn't be better timed in that sense, and Sian and I have been in dialogue about it, but it is super helpful to have this at this stage. As well as that, the council and the ICB, who will have a statutory duty to have an autism strategy, have been working with a number of other partners and trying to feed in as well the voice of those with lived experience of autism or ADHD, to take some conversations out to probably 20 or so different groups or settings, very mindful of the fact that whilst listening is incredibly important, as has been raised already, that there is a certain amount of energy that it takes to engage in this when you find yourself in some of these situations. So we've been trying to do it as sensitively as possible. May not always have got it right, but rather than hold huge workshops with 100 people in the room, we've been trying to go out to existing groups and have those conversations. And we're halfway through that process at the moment. From May, we hope to have a strategy which will be pulled together. And what we're looking at is many of the aspects of this report that are pulled together around the process for assessment and diagnosis, and the process within healthcare that people may go through, but actually wider than that, the society that we want to be as a city that supports people who are neurodivergent. And that is a much bigger aspiration, but I think something that strikes me about this report and other things that I've read is that we have to get both right. We have to try and make sure the support services are in the right place whilst moving society into a place where neurodiversity is much better understood, and all of our institutions, whether it's education or economy, transport, actually are able to adapt. That's a long-term goal, but the strategy will cover all of those things, not just the pathways that might be reported. So it won't be a perfect process. It will be an all-age strategy, so important to clarify that we will be looking at both children, young people, those within the transition period of their life, and older sort of age adults, and it will cover a variety of different sectors, but the CYC, the council and ICB have been taking a bit of a lead because we have that statutory duty. However, been at pains to make sure that the Neurodiversity and Mental Health Working Group under Connecting Our City has been regularly briefed, inviting sort of members of the community to come into our working group too, so it has that experience. So trying to push it forward as fast as we can. Hope that's a helpful update, Chair, just in terms of where we're at with the strategy.
Thank you. Did you want to respond on any of that?
I was just going to say, I think part of the reason why we wanted to do this report now was we knew that the strategy was coming up, and it felt like a really timely opportunity when so many of the people speaking to us had stories relating to this. And when we reached out to partners and they said, yeah, absolutely, we will work with you on this, it felt like too good an opportunity to feed into that strategy, make sure those voices were central to it and could shape where that went to miss. So yeah, really delighted that it's timely for you and it's timely for the families too.
Thank you. Sarah, did you want to?
Thank you, Chair. It would have been remiss of me not to comment, as I was given the opportunity, or the organisation was given the opportunity to comment prior to. However, I realised I potentially should have declared an interest just because I do have a personal sort of experiences recently in terms of children's neurodiversity services in York, which is why it's incredibly emotional for me as well, just to comment. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I read every page several times of this report in acknowledgement of that, for my own personal experiences, but also for every other child and every other family who's experiencing difficulties. And I just wanted to sort of acknowledge a couple of points, really, if I may. So first of all, just that point that around some of the findings in terms of society and the experience that children and young people experience. And actually, I think often the experience is that young people themselves often cope better than the system around them. And young people in terms of peer groups as well, not exclusively, but often do cope better. And actually, we've got a lot to learn as schools, as health providers, and as family members as well to learn from our children. I just also wanted to comment on the ICB response. So, and also make some references to Hillary's comments earlier on, and just in terms of the defensiveness of the report. I think Sian's mentioned that we were invited to fact check the report, so hence why there was fact checking included in the response. And there was a relatively short turnaround of around 10 working days, just because of the Christmas period. And but I was very keen and did give the teams a lot of encouragement to include some of the positive things. So that was about making sure that we do also demonstrate and share within that some of the positive developments around early identification, the work with schools in health. There's a pilot that I've got some references to later, which I'll make, and also bringing together web-based navigation tools as well to help families navigate services. Also really pleased to see that your teaching hospitals have now included a digital flag on their system so that we are identifying children with neurodevelopment diagnoses and issues as well on the system, so that we are, you know, as a health system, pulling together and supporting children at every opportunity. And then just two final comments. Again, just due to the timescales, what health systems weren't able to do was actually take the report through to the provider-based forums, so the Mental Health, Learning Disabilities and Autism Collaborative, for example, which will be taking forward discussions around these recommendations at a future executive meeting. I did follow that up this morning as well with the Managing Director of the Collaborative, just to confirm that. And I'd also encourage, again, just recognising what Hilary has said in terms of where there are any doubts about any of the accuracies in the report, either in the ICB response or in the report itself. I'd encourage anyone with those questions to get in touch with the ICB. That could be queries about what is commissioned or what isn't commissioned around treatment services, but also that diagnostic and parent and carer support as well. You can do that via hnyicb-nl.pals@nhs.net. And there is also the Be Heard website details that are provided within the response to be able to get involved in the design of services. Again, thank you. And as I say, I did read the report with great interest, personally and professionally. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to make any further comment? Martin?
Thank you, Chair, and apologies, I was late to the meeting. And likewise, I've read the report with great interest, and I think it's a very reasonable challenge about the whole system, not just locally, regionally, but it's absolutely nationally. I think there are some good things ahead that I think we're starting to see nationally. Most importantly, some challenge from the government around changing the school system. And the school system does need to change. The reality is head teachers and others that are doing the hardest in schools, you know, they're working the hardest, can only work to what they're given in terms of the policies and procedures and legislation they're working to. So I think the change in curriculum will be absolutely fairly fundamental, particularly for children. I think I would absolutely promote what the ICB have done around trauma-informed practice. Huge amount of investment that's gone into not just one part of the workforce, but open to any part of the workforce. And both myself and Peter attended some of that training this week. And I think what was really important that came across for me was actually we need to recognise that children and adults actually who are neurodiverse, particularly with autism, are going through trauma every single day of their life. So to look at this through a trauma lens is really important. I think the more we can get people trained, certainly that's happening across children's social care in York, the more we can get trained in trauma-informed practice, I think we'll see a better workforce for it and some better approaches to these issues. So really welcome the report. I think considerable challenge in there, but wouldn't expect anything different, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you want to speak, Michael? Thank you.
Thanks. Just building a little bit on what Martin was saying there. So yeah, difficult report to read, but as you know, as has been said, nothing compared to the difficulties which people are facing every day, and which are often compounded by the system which we're trying to provide support. And in reading the report and the recommendations, you know, I'm struck by how some of this certainly needs that strategic approach, but how a lot of it is about attitudinal approaches and the way in which we talk to people, where we collaborate with people in terms of trying to find solutions with them. As Martin said, there is a lot of work which is going on around the workforce and trying to make the workforce more trauma-informed, work around you know, values-based and culture. And so I think this report, certainly from my perspective, and I work within the council, does give us more power to the elbow in terms of being able to reflect on what people are telling us and use that to enable better discussions about the way in which people are talking, acting, interacting, and behaving. So it's a really difficult report, but it's one which I think we need to hold on to. We need to not, kind of lose sight of over the coming weeks, months, and years, and make sure that all of us who we work with think about it, reflect on it, and do better in terms of the way in which we talk to one another and the way in which we collaborate.
Thank you. Anyone else to make any more comment? No. I just wanted to say, yeah, just to carry on, I think what really struck me as part of this report is working within existing systems and having a realisation and an awareness of people, training for other services who deal with people every single day about making things so people can access them and people do not feel judged and understood within these services. All the stuff around schools was really, really interesting. I think I was particularly struck about the number of exclusions amongst children and young people who were experiencing neurodiversity. And the listening to aspect is really good, as Peter said, how it will play into the scrutiny and the development, because I think a question we need to ask time and time again amongst the listening is, who are we listening to? And it needs to be those voices from people within. Sarah.
Sorry, Chair, you just reminded me of a question that I actually had for possibly Sian, I think. But just in terms of the schools was a big theme, wasn't it? As you just said, and I found the same in terms of connections with health, but also just attitudes within schools in general. This strikes me as something that would be really powerful through the primary schools and secondary schools networks as well. So it's just that question really about, are we taking the report through those channels as well?
Martin.
Yes, we will be doing. What I failed to mention is we were discussing this earlier in the week in the Safeguarding Executive Board, and we've agreed that this will go on to that agenda with Sian being invited to present it, and that's to all key partners, which includes now a representative of education, in terms of Chief Executive of the Multi-Academy Trust. So that will be fed back throughout the schools across the city.
Thank you. Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points for me. I think there is probably something about being clear as well about our city's approach to this and our values. People have used that word a couple of times. I'm aware this is in danger of becoming sometimes quite a politicised area, actually, and I think I would suggest we need to resist that as much as possible. That this is very much a values thing that we would sign up, hopefully through the strategy. Definitely as a council and a health system and wider partners. I think about police colleagues and fire and rescue colleagues and others around the table, that actually we are a city that desires to be as welcoming and inclusive to all. And actually that's a bit, it sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but it's not when we have major political figures around the world declaring things within this space that I just think are fundamentally unhelpful. So I think there is something about that I'm seeing lots around the table. So I think there is a sense in which we'd like our strategy to reflect that. The second thing I was going to say is I do think the strategy will have to have a real balance between setting out what is needed and what the aspiration is, but then being able to talk about what is possible, and what is possible is in some way limited by the resource that all of our agencies have. And there is a line in the report which talks about professionals finding ways to say no to things, and that may be the case in some situations, but I do think sometimes professionals are having to allocate limited resources in the best possible way, which feels like saying no. So a way of us being able to express that dynamic as well is a real challenge for us. But I think finding ways to say this is possible and this isn't, this isn't needed because it is needed, but it's not possible. It's a hard dynamic, but I really welcome, I guess, our board's sort of input into that when we go to a public consultation, or have we got the wording right? Have we, the two fears here are we don't have a strategy which those sort of experiencing and with lived experience has enough aspiration in, and the second, equal and opposite, is that it promises a huge amount that we never deliver on, and we lose a lot of trust. So I would appreciate the board's feedback as we get through that we get that balance between those two places. Thank you.
I absolutely agree that we have to be realistic throughout this, but then keep at the heart of it the people we want to have the most support and who need that support. Martin?
This will be the final time I come back. There's a lot going through my brain today, but I think we've obviously got the development in York of the Send Family Hub, which is a fantastic opportunity for multiple different professionals to come together. I think one of the issues here, and it's recognised throughout the report, there isn't a single agency that has an answer here. This is about all agencies coming together and thinking differently, and perhaps even designing things that we've not got designed yet in the system. So the Send Hub is an opportunity to do that. I've certainly made a commitment from the local authority that we will put an initial £60,000 into the middle of the table for a committee of professionals and parents and SENDIAS, people who represent families, to come together and think about how we can redesign parts of the system, whether that's training or doing something differently. So I think we will see, as the Family Hub develops, a greater commitment to doing things differently. I think we do need to think in a way that we've maybe not thought before on some of these issues.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for contributions. Did anybody want to add anything else? No. Okay, I just want to remind, oh, sorry, Sian.
Just one final message. I think there were a number of young people who spoke to us direct, and one person who wasn't included in the report but did want to make a point was a 6-year-old who hates their behaviour code at school because it tells them they're a bad person. And I think there's something really powerful about understanding that. We often hear that neurodivergent young people have low self-esteem, but you don't have to look very far. Like, is there a chicken and egg situation here? Do they have low self-esteem because we spend their entire lives telling them there's something wrong with them, rather than we haven't fixed the world yet, so that it's a good place for you to live in. And I think there's something for me about how we try and reflect that collectively, that we believe all young people are brilliant young people. We need to work harder to make sure this world works for them.
Yeah, absolutely agree that we need to work and make sure that the world around fits the young people. So I would really like to remind everyone on the board that they need to respond to the recommendations within the report in writing, and these responses will be collated, presented as part of Healthwatch's annual report to the Health and Wellbeing Board. I know the ICB have already responded, and they will all be collated in July, and responses should be sent to Healthwatch. Thank you. Okay, so now we move on to agenda item 6, which is the City of York Safeguarding Adults Board Annual Report 2023-24, and I would like to welcome Jane Timpson, the Independent Chair of the City of York Safeguarding Adults Board, to the table, and Michael Melvin, Safeguarding Adults Director for the City of York Council. We have 20 minutes for this item for presentation, question and discussion. Thank you.
I'll do a very brief introduction and then hand over to Jane for the presentation. So, chair members, this is the annual report from York Safeguarding Adults Board, and it's here for you to note the content, but also to understand some of the work which has gone on over the past year, some of the achievements and some of our challenges. And to consider how, as members and as a board, you might be able to help us in terms of contributing to our ambitions for 2025 going forward, particularly around some of the themes in the city which we all know about, which we want to make a difference in, around rough sleeping, around young people at risk of exploitation, and around issues around self-neglect. So I'll hand on to Jane. Sorry, before I do that, also a big thanks to Tim Madgwick, who was here for first part of this report, and to use smiling face we see in it and the foreword, and a major thanks to Jane who's taken on that baton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michael. So this report is 23-24. It feels like an awful long time ago, obviously before my time. But I think what we have learned is that the resilience of safeguarding services has remained consistent over 23-24, despite the pressure on safeguarding services across the city as a result of COVID recovery and the cost of living crisis. Next slide. Okay, so this was the board structure in 23-24. It's actually been changed, and we are continuing to develop it to meet the needs. Just a little bit of background for those who might not be familiar with the Safeguarding Board. It is a statutory and multi-agency partnership that leads on the strategic development of safeguarding across the city. As specified in the Care Act, we have 3 statutory partners, which are the Council, the local ICB and North Yorkshire Police. We also have members from nominated lead representatives across a wide range of non-core partner agencies, and actually that is where the richness comes from to help us provide the safeguarding response. As a board, we meet 4 times a year. Like I say, we've got 4 subgroups. That will change, but it's the executive group that is made up of strategy partners that help formulate the agenda for the board. And then under that, we have the quality and assurance group chaired by Michael, a review and learning subgroup, and a voice of the city subgroup. The Care Act is actually 10 years old now and has been guiding us on how we deal with safeguarding. It does explain the statutory duties placed on local authorities to support adults with care and support needs. We don't do this in isolation, but we need the help of our partners, including the Community Safety Partnership, Safer Partnership in York, as well as the Children's Safeguarding Partnership and the Domestic Abuse Partnership Board. There are 3 core duties under the Care Act: to publish a strategic plan, publish an annual report, and the need to commission safeguarding adult reviews when the criteria is met. So a theme that I think you've heard quite clearly and very well expressed so far is the need for us to be capturing and responding to those with lived experience. And this year, the report does have an anonymised case study, and we will be seeing more of that going forward. I won't read it out, it's there for you to see, but I think it's testament of the multi-agency working that this person who felt they had no hope has now got to a place of recovery and feeling listened to and feeling that they've got a contribution to make. As chair, I have introduced the standing agenda item to highlight the voice of lived experience and also to help us as a board reflect on what difference we are actually making. And that is actually quite a powerful tool, and we do welcome the contributions the partners make to that. Capturing the voice of adults through the voice of the city group has been a bit stuttery within 23-24, and we are exploring ways currently about how we can improve that in relation to safeguarding in the board's governance structure. But it's safe to say that unless we're actually responding and listening to the people who have experienced abuse and neglect, we're not doing our job, because they are the ones that will dictate what our strategy should be, what we need to do, and find ways of improving. So within 23-24, there was a good deal of work done to improve the governance, I think, and the policies and procedures for safeguarding so partners could actually respond appropriately. I think the first major achievement was a transitional safeguarding protocol that was endorsed by both the Safeguarding Adult Board as well as the Children's Safeguarding Partnership. The framework provides early opportunities to identify the most appropriate pathways for young people, facilitates joint working and ensures appropriate referrals and signposting taking place in a timely way to help reduce safeguarding risks. There was a lot of work being taken in 22-23 to ensure an updated joint multi-agency safeguarding adult policy and procedure. And that's used across all agencies. It was designed as part of a regional consortium. And this year we are developing the local contacts and resource section so that there is the referral, the process and guidance resources are available, not just to City of York workers, but across the partnership and also to members of the public. We've also introduced a local people in positions of trust process, and we are trying to make sure that is embedded into all our agencies' practice. That is very similar to the LADO process in children's, for those who know that, but there is some work to do, I think, to ensure it's embedded as strongly across adult services as it is children's services. Also, during 23-24, the board developed and published a range of guidance and practice resources. That includes some key guidance for practitioners about how to make a good safeguarding referral. And there was also a piece of work done about safeguarding adults and falls and how to respond appropriately. There was also work started on developing a multi-agency data and information so that we can get a meaningful dashboard. That's still work ongoing. I will say it's not just York struggling with that, it's a national issue. One of the reasons being we all collect different data, doesn't necessarily talk to each other, and we don't have that one unique database to collect it on. But we will continue to battle with that to try and improve, because that's actually such a rich way of informing what we need to do. So we do reflect regularly on the board makeup and who we need to be involved in safeguarding. And during that financial year represented by the board, there were new members, and we've recently introduced the probation, housing and the Department of Work and Pensions, which we know will again bring a richness to what we need to do. So everyone loves data. I will not give you too much of this. In section 4 in the report, you will find statistical information for safeguarding. What's interesting to note is there's been a continued increase, about 10%, on the volume of safeguarding concerns received compared to the following year. And actually that represents a 42% increase since 21-22. That is in line with the national trend. It's not unique to York. But we do see it as a positive, because it means that there's greater awareness of when people with care and support needs may need a safeguarding response. 60% of those concerns get converted into an inquiry, which is when action actually will take place. Now, that might be lower than previous years, but it's actually much higher than the English average, which is just under 30%. There is some work locally to try and understand that. It may be that we need to be doing more work at a universal level rather than waiting for it to be a statutory response. And I'm looking at Michael because Adult Care hold the handle on safeguarding inquiries, and they are the lead on that. Recording on the Mosaic system is an evolving picture, and improvements were made in 2023 and 24 to inform how information is recorded, including where concerns originate from, and that will help us get the safeguarding picture across the city. In 23-24, there were no safeguarding adult reviews completed, but there were 2 started, and they will be completed very shortly. Since then, we have, I'm laughing because I was a bit shocked, we have plenty of referrals that we're currently working through, and we're going to see a good number of SARs coming forward, including a very large thematic review on self-neglect and people who hoard. Going forward, we expect to provide more detailed breakdown of the themes from the data that is collected. So there were 6 strategic priorities in 23-24. The report in section 6 does give you details of how partners have contributed to that. I'm not going to go through it. It is there for your information. I think the key takeaway is that there is a very proactive community and that we do benefit from working together, and we are well served by the partners who work not just in York but across the wider footprint. Next year's annual report will have, like I say, more comprehensive activity undertaken by Housing, Probation and the Department of Work and Pensions. And we're also had conversations with the local prison to get some assurance about safeguarding arrangements there as well. Okay. In relation to safeguarding adult reviews, this slide just gives you the criteria. It is set under the Care Act under section 44. The two STAR, like I've mentioned already, the STARs that were completed are near completion. And I'm not going to repeat myself about that, so we can just move on. But during this past year, this current year, 24-25, the board has increased its business capacity by recruiting its first board business manager. And that has helped support the priorities for 24-25 and improve the governance arrangements for the board. In addition, the board has had a period of transition from when my predecessor left, when I started at the 1st of July last year. And we'll be able to report more, I think, on the work of the board and how we are embedding the voice of the adult as well. So looking forward to 25-28, we know from speaking to partners, from the learning from the safeguarding adult reviews that are currently taking place, that we've identified what the themes will be for our strategy. We know that we need to be better at embedding the learning that is coming from SARS. That's been an area I think that's been particularly weak locally, and that's something that we have an ambition to improve. We also know that we need to improve our response to exploitation, and particularly in relation to young people. So, you know, while Save the Children Safeguarding Partnership has a handle once children turn 18, there is a continued need to provide support. We also know that we need to provide a strategic response to homelessness with a particular emphasis on rough sleeping and with a particular emphasis on those with care and support needs. I think that's probably been a bit hidden, and that's something we will hopefully be shining a light on and getting a response locally. And then self-neglect and hoarding, we know we need to do some work on as well. The way we will be able to do this is through an increased multi-agency workforce development programme. So looking at partners to hopefully open up their training offers so that we can make that more of a multi-agency approach. We will be developing a multi-agency risk management for adults who are at risk of abuse so that we have a more team around the adult approach locally. And then obviously the governance behind that as well to make sure that we are doing audits and looking at how we are responding and listening to those voices as well. And the time frame for this is we are meeting with partners later this month to actually start putting some actions to those strategic themes. We'll be doing wider consultation and engagement during February, March. And we will hopefully have agreed a business plan by April, which we will plan to take to the Adult Scrutiny Committee in June. So just for information, that is where people around the table can find more information locally about if you have any concerns, certainly for those councillors around the table, so that you understand how to make a referral should you come across that in your constituencies. And also there's information there about how to access the triads. On the next slide, we've put this one in really to emphasise about over the last 10 years, all partners have seen an increase in the complexity of the cases that they're dealing with. Individual partners do not have the solution. And in fact, it's imperative that the Safeguarding Board works closely with the Children's Partnership and Safer York Partnership collaboratively, because we've seen evidence in children's safeguarding practice reviews and domestic abuse related death reviews, previously known as DHRs, that we are seeing similar themes, and it is a system change that we need to achieve. I think you've heard this already in relation to neurodivergent needs, closer working together rather than trying to do it by single agency. So, any questions?
Thank you, Jane. So just to note, we're being asked to note this report and consider how we can all contribute to the joint work and the strategic plans for 2025 onwards. Would anybody like to speak? Peter?
Thank you, Jane. That was really informative and really helpful on the Director of Public Health for the city. And I'm interested in the data that shows that the referrals coming in and the conversion into, I think the report says the section 42 inquiries are lower than that national average in terms of higher. So is there a concern there? Am I reading this right, that we are not identifying and in a sense we're not enabling referrals to be as high as they ought to be? Is that the conclusion?
I'm going to hand you to Michael because he'll have a much better understanding from the front door in adult care about how referrals are triaged and the decision to convert them into an inquiry.
So, so I think the issue which we have is we're seeing an increase in the numbers that come to us as concerns, and that's one element. So we can say that's a good thing because there's more awareness within the city, and we're going out and we're asking people to come to us if they're concerned. So I kind of put that as a bit of a tick. But I think it's a tick with a caution as well, because what we also need to be doing is making sure that in our community and early intervention services, we do all that we can to help people manage risk in their lives and stay safe. So it's a kind of a tick, but with a little kind of question mark. The conversion of those into Section 42 enquiries. There's a lot of discretion around how local authorities do that. Some local authorities do an awful lot of work prior to going into Section 42. We've generally, put things more into Section 42 because of the rigour that gives in terms of the safety around that. However, there is, work which we need to do to understand actually through, if we do more in terms of the triage stage, are there things which we can do to help people kind of plan their safety and manage risk without getting into those, more lengthy enquiries. And I think part of that is the way in which we operate with, at the moment, the police and with TUV. So at the moment, we have a system whereby all concerns are effectively screened through those three agencies on a daily basis. But I think there's a real opportunity to open that up to other agencies who are able to help us understand what we might be able to do at that kind of early stage to support people to prevent the need to progress into Section 42. So I think there's, there are things which we can do, and I think I would be concerned if we saw the continued rise in concern just continue, exponentially, and we continue to put that percentage into Section 42. I think it becomes unsustainable eventually.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. I think what's interesting, Jen, is to see how it's changing, because I've been involved with this for a very, very long time. And I think particularly taking account of neurodivergence, which obviously you were discussing before I was able to get here, which throws up a lot of safeguarding issues. But the other thing that I hope that you'll be able to keep a focus on is transitions, because that has caused us problems in the past, as Michael well knows. And it is a time when children who are neurodivergent become adults who are neurodivergent, but all the rules change and they don't understand them. So I wonder if you can just give some assurance on that.
Yeah, but quite happy to. So I think we've made a decent start. So we've put in the transitional protocol with children's services, so that everybody operating within the system can understand how we get involved in terms of making sure that we identify younger people who may need that safeguarding support through into adulthood. And alongside that, there's both a strategic and an operational transitions group, which is looking at, particular, individuals and cohorts, and what do you need to do to make sure that we support their transition well. But as it says on the strategic plan, there's a specific focus for us around younger adults and the particular types of harm which we know that they suffer. And again, within our strategy, the ways in which we want to get into that are through our approach to the workforce. So to make sure we have a workforce which is really skilled and able to work with people in those circumstances, making sure that we get the governance of that right, so that we understand what we have and how to drive it forward and how well we're doing. And then really being able to learn as well, because there's an awful lot, as you said, which we've done over the years and which is going on elsewhere, which can inform our approach. So I think I'd summarise as this 23-24 decent start on this, 24-25 one of a small number of priorities for us.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. Tim, did you want to say?
Welcome the report. I think the point about the increase in referrals is one that we all need to have cognizance of, and certainly we've invested a lot in terms of our workforce, in terms of recognising vulnerability and making sure that we do refer in. It was just to provide some reassurance that the vulnerability assessment team, I think, is a bit of a bottleneck at the moment, and given the challenges we all have around budgets, it is an area that we are prioritising. It's one of a few very limited areas that we're going to prioritise for investments in the next year, as we're going through the process of putting our budget together at the moment. So I just wanted to reassure around that.
Okay.
Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was just going back to some of the transitional safeguarding. I think certainly an area that we see as an absolute priority in children's. I think recognising, but like we're recognising much more around neurodiversity. I think internationally we're starting to understand much more around neuroscience generally, and the fact that young people don't really develop or fully develop their brain until they're 25. So really, this is a really important part of our work in terms of making sure that we don't make young people adults too quickly, don't treat them as adults too quickly, and we offer support rather than more punitive approaches, I guess, particularly in the space of exploitation. So I think there's lots of work that we're all doing across the system, increasingly to understand that part of the world and do better, but from a perspective of support rather than anything else. And I guess the other bit that we will really see, I think, a better system in the future is from the Children and Wellbeing of Schools Bill, which also requires and mandates that there will be multi-agency child protection teams going forward. So as of 2027, all agencies will be part of multi-agency child protection teams in terms of the statutory agencies. I think that will strengthen what we do around children moving into their adult life.
Thank you, Martin. I just wanted to say as well, really pleased that we're looking at people who are increasingly vulnerable. I'm really pleased to see that homelessness and rough sleeping is included in there, as for many years, people who were homeless and rough sleeping, it was looked at, they were really hard to engage, and it was almost impossible to engage people. So as we move forward and look at reviewing systems around engaging people who are harder to engage, thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you. I'll just add that, that's all right,
Yeah,
Councillor. They're not hard to engage. We haven't found the way to engage with them. And it's a
Absolutely.
really important distinction. And I think also what we're seeing is a much better understanding of the wellbeing principle under the Care Act, and how that actually is not just about older people, it's about anyone who is struggling either with just care or care and support.
Yes.
So thank you.
And yeah, that was the messaging around
Absolutely.
people being too hard to engage.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So thank you. Really appreciate being allowed to share the report. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if we move on to agenda item number 7, which is the annual update on the joint needs assessment. And I would like to welcome Jen Irving to the table, and Peter and Jen will present the report. We have 15 minutes for this item, which is going to be a presentation and a discussion.
Thanks, Jen. I'll kick us off, and we'll try to be very brief this time for discussion. It's good to welcome Jen here again, who has her annual visit to the board to talk about the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. Some really brief slides, which we'll rattle through. If you move to the next one, that would be fabulous. Thank you. So a Joint Strategic Needs Assessment is the most jargony bit of my world because it's a horrible acronym, but essentially it is actually one of this board's core functions. We have to write a needs assessment on what the health needs of the population are, and then write a strategy that responds to that. That's one of the things this board's asked to do. The health needs assessment is within legislation in terms of what it looks like, but then the statutory guidance that followed actually gave local areas quite a lot of sway over what the needs assessment looked like, with, I guess, 2 real core components. Do a strategic summary of what health looks like in your local area, and then do some further deeper work when specific health needs about particular communities that we know may have particular needs come up, so that you have that really good evidence base in which to drive the decisions you're making. So I'd like the board to just bear that in mind, those 2 functions, that overall summary and then the deeper pieces of work. Jen will go into that a little bit more. Next slide, if we can. This is just to show that we see understanding the need of the population as part of a cycle. We have to almost ensure that the work we're doing as commissioners, and this is within some of the statutory guidance within the Health and Social Care Act 22, is first of all assessment of need. What is out there? What do we have within the population that we need to respond to? The doing of the work, which might be commissioning, it might be providing a service, and then the evaluation and monitoring. Did it work? That 3 stages of the cycle are meant to be how health and care functions. Now, the extent to which it does or not could be questioned in various different places, but that general framework around a commissioning cycle is still very important, even though commissioning is probably evolving as we go through. Next slide. This slide just shows how we're trying to get within our needs assessments from data, I guess numbers being presented on a page, to decisions. And there are some steps between them. So what we do in our agencies often is share data around individuals. That's not really where the JSNA is. That's not quite the space it's in. Data sharing and being able to share care records, that sort of thing, very important. But actually the JSNA really is towards the top end of the triangle, particularly around that red box that says intelligence. So turning the data that we have on the health of the population into insights which enable our decision makers, whether they're spending money or arranging services, to make decisions. The next slide, if we can, I'll hand over to Jen. She's going to talk us through the actual JSNA itself.
My mic didn't stick. So you're going at a fair pace there. I'll try and sort of keep up with that momentum. So this slide is a little snapshot from our website, and it really dispensates that first part of the JSNA process, that strategic overview. And I go on about it all the time, but I really would encourage people to look at it, use it, share it in team meetings, talk about it as a tool to understand our city, the people that live here, what's changing and what's static. If you go on there, you'll see that we don't use very many numbers. There's not a huge amount of data in that, and that's really deliberate because it goes out of date the moment that you've published it. So it's there as a kind of narrative summary, and then the links off to all of that extra detail to give you a kind of strategic sense of who is in our city and their health. The next part of it I'll talk about on the next. Oh yeah, okay, do that bit. That was surprising. a very sort of systematic overview. So the next part of it that I'll talk about are these health needs assessments. And so these are projects that we maybe spend about 6 months looking into a very specific group of people. And it's often because it's timely for a commissioning cycle. Maybe the legislation's changed and the way that we're approaching things is looking a little bit different. Or something of that nature. Something's changed and it makes sense to talk about a population group. And so all of those sort of red blobs down the side are the the tools that we might use. We might look at the national evidence, we might look at our local data summaries, we might look at who's in our services and crucially who isn't in our services. That we've been discussing so much already in this meeting today. It's the people that aren't maybe accessing the care that they need at the time that they need it. And so we kind of take that sort of whole population approach. I'll go next slide, please. Sorry, it's slightly awkward because they're behind me and I've got them on here as well. And so this is a lot of words on a singular slide, but it's the summary of over the last few years needs assessments that we've done where we've taken a period of time and we've looked at a population group. So we looked at special educational needs last year. We also looked at deaths related to drug use last year, and then you can see a huge array of other topics on there. You'll spot some sort of COVID pieces of work that were done at a period of time, one around gypsies and travellers. I will just point out that there's one around pharmaceutical needs because that's one of the statutory ones that we have to do for this board. Kind of comes on a cycle, so everybody across the country is doing them in the same way. And then directly above it, sexual health, which was to do with a big recommissioning budget change. We wanted to make sure that we understood who we were commissioning for.
Should I take over?
Please do.
Thank you. So there were some more slides here, which in the interest of time, I'd suggest we send out and they will go out, I think, with the minutes, but they explain a little bit more about how the JSNA tries to sum up the health of the city, and we've developed this thing which we call our city's health narrative, and that's really to help us as a city understand that we're a city that lives in good health, and we have a lot of things which make for good health. However, actually, many of our health indicators, the things which benchmark York, actually show York being around about average when it comes to life expectancy, the burden of disease, and actually a number of areas in which we're identifying particular need in the strategic needs assessment. You might recall me talking in previous times about our suicide rate, about our deaths from drug overdoses, from alcohol-related causes for hospital admissions, things like that, that the JSNA really identifies for us that we should really be focusing on. So that the slides then go, if we could turn to the next one, to talk about that in a bit more detail. And then the rest of the slides talk a little bit about something, is there a further slide? Or is that it? Something called a population health hub. And I just wanted to mention this because this presentation so far has talked quite a lot about the work that the public health team have done, particularly around the health needs assessments, but it's part of a wider partnership that we have with the ICB, with the hospital, with CHUV, with the police. In fact, lots of partners around the table send their analysts and their data people along to this hub, which meets on a regular basis, talks about how we share data together, drawing from other areas where the assessment of need is happening, and the population health hub as a unit is also highlighted on the website in terms of some of its work. So I didn't want to not mention that important bit of partnership work. But the report's just to note, Chair, because the JSNA is a statutory function, we want to make sure the board knows about it, it's highlighted, and welcome any questions on what we could do further to use it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Sarah?
Thanks, Chair. And it's probably not a question, so I'm going to be slightly cheeky, but there is a reference here in the next item, but because the next item covers a lot of subject matters, I didn't want to lose sight of it. So I thought I'll just bring it forward here, but it's just that point that Peter's just made in terms of the population health hub. It is a real asset for York. Not everyone has one. In fact, I'd probably say York is an exception rather than the rule around having a space where analysts are actually coming together across the whole spectrum of public sector services to talk about need. That feels quite novel. However, it's absolutely essential, and understanding need is everybody's business. it isn't the role of commissioners, it is the role of all of us working in partnership together. So just wanted to make that link with the York Health and Care Partnership. And also, you'll also be aware, Chair and members, the recent decision to approve a number of neighbourhood principles in terms of moving to neighbourhood working on a number of defined geographies, which again is really pivotal in terms of the holy grail of all public sector services working to common an understanding of a common understanding of our communities and neighbourhoods, which gives us and paves us the way to enable multi-agency teams to work together on those neighbourhood footprints. So I suppose the question in there with Peter is, I know that we are looking at how we can support the Population Health Hub to start to bring together some of these needs and this data and this intelligence, as you pointed out. Are we going to be able to look at that on a neighbourhood footprint so that as those teams start to know who each other is and start to get to grips with who's in their local neighbourhood, that those teams can actually start to use this data, use this website to start to think about interventions that make sense for people. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, I'll sort of almost answer that question just by use of an example. It's a nice example because it pulls together people from your team, Sarah, it pulls together people from the hospital, pulls together people from Alison's organisation for the CVS. So a couple of years ago, we started a project which is called Proactive Social Prescribing, which is absolutely what you've outlined there. It's looking at a need within a population. One of the biggest drivers of a hospital admission that's unplanned, particularly in the winter, is an exacerbation of a respiratory condition, and we know that people with respiratory conditions are much more likely to attend A&E, to be admitted, and we also know that there are a number of simple things that can be done through primary care and through community services to make that less likely, if not totally out of the question. And so respiratory social prescribing has been a way of taking the data that our teams hold to identify a cohort of between 200 or 300 people who meet a number of criteria for both social need, we know there's some vulnerabilities there, but also the clinical need, and contacting them through the clinical systems we have in order to offer them proactive social prescribing. So a social prescriber who's really targeted on reducing that hospital admission. And it's evaluated really well. The member of staff in Alison's team, I hope you mind me saying, has done an absolutely amazing job at supporting those individuals. And we know that they have seen that the really good self-reported outcomes. It's not had a formal evaluation, so it's very hard to say that we have saved X number of admissions at this stage. We'd like to be able to demonstrate that in the longer term. I think it's a good example of the types of project that we need to work on through the hub that you're absolutely suggesting, Sarah. And I'd see probably the next one we need to set about is that if we're building a neighbourhood model for the city, very much in alignment with national government policy around neighbourhood health working, we need to be able to demonstrate that we can focus those resources on people probably in that secondary prevention category who are going to be using social care, are going to be coming through bits of the NHS that we probably don't want to come through, and we prefer them to be using primary community care in order to build the right healthcare around them. And data's got to be at the centre of that, because we know we can find those patients through primary care records, but we're not utilising that data at the moment. So absolutely, I think we've already had a conversation, I think the Population Health Hub a couple of weeks ago, on integrated neighbourhood teams, and we need to keep on coming back to it.
Thank you, Peter. Alison.
So just building on what Peter said, the people that we've been working with through the practice of social prescribing have had lots and lots of challenges. And these people would normally fall through the gaps, the nets. And our social prescribers had to be very, very persistent in appointments might be cancelled, they might not turn up. But it's that persistency that has helped move them from where they were to where they've got to now, which is in a much, much better place, much more in control of their health and well-being. They're happier, less lonely and everything. So it was that persistency that was really crucial for this, which most of you in your agencies don't have that time to do that. but it has proved dividends. It wasn't an expensive project, was it? And it's actually probably saved quite a lot of money. And hopefully we've got that data come in. Yeah, okay.
Councillor Winston.
Thank you. Just want to ask if there's any movement on dental health and whether we can see any effect of the supervised toothbrushing. I hope the answer is yes, but I don't know whether it is or not.
Thanks, Councillor Ottoman. I think the answer is probably I'm going to have to get back to you in terms of how we're evaluating supervised toothbrushing. We have schemes in 6 early year settings, schools and early year settings in the city. The ICB are funding an expansion of that, so that is going to expand. Supervised toothbrushing is one of those things that is so well evidence-based that we don't routinely then always get around to collecting the data, but I think we should, because we need to understand how it's working locally and what some of the barriers to uptake might be. So I can certainly go away and ask my oral health lead to have a look at that and to come back with some data in terms of, you know, are we seeing evidence of impact? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If that's everyone, I just wanted to follow up really briefly on what Alison said, which ties really well into the last speaker who was talking about engaging vulnerable people with social care and meeting people where they are and working out where to meet people for them to be able to get the best service they possibly can, which is something that the social prescribing you were describing absolutely does provide. Okay, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jen. Okay, so if we move on to agenda item number 8, and that is the update from the York Health and Care Partnership, which Sarah will present. We've got 20 minutes, including discussion, questions, comments anyone wants to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Okay, so the latest report of the York Health and Care Partnership, I think we skipped a month last time because of the, we had a detailed discussion about the ICB's work around design for the future. So there's quite a lot in this pack encompassing quite a few months' work. And the minutes for the September meeting are therefore enclosed. That probably feels like a long time ago now, but there was certainly a lot that was discussed, so therefore worth picking up today. Just to remind everybody for context that the York Health and Care Partnership Executive Committee is the forum through which the senior partner leaders come together, and it's really around the things that none of us can do alone. We've talked a lot about interface today in terms of those multi-agency partnerships. So that's the work that we do very much through the partnership, and you can see all of our members are listed there. So just starting with the September meeting, we have discussed actually at the Health and Wellbeing Board the design for the future, but this is just recapping again, just due to being slightly out of time, the discussions that took place at the September and August meetings of the Place Board. So really this is about recognising that long-term reimagining of services. If we continue to do the same things, we're going to get the same results. I think there was a report, it sounds quite dramatic, but the Jaws of Doom, was it, that was published by local government several years ago, and it feels that we're in those jaws now, or and that's the point really, in terms of recognising reform is absolutely required. The NHS is absolutely part of that. So the design for the future work was just really to remind the board that was about signalling and seeking input to how we could reimagine those services, given that we have fewer specialists. The fewer specialists coming through in healthcare professions, many people retiring. We've certainly got many more specialties that are having those problems than those that don't really. And Lucy's nodding, but I can also see a number of colleagues from our mental health provider as well nodding. So we are having to look at different things, and also I think a theme through some of the conversation that we have as a board being around trade-offs as well, in terms of between different services, and recognising that we can't commission everything with the finite resources that we have in public sector. So partners have really been focused on through the board, how would we reimagine the bits that we are responsible for, and that is integrated community-based care, general practice, district nursing, community mental health, schools, the local area coordination services. How do we bring these services together through that neighbourhood model? So that's been an active discussion through the board, and we will be continuing to have a very pertinent discussion at tomorrow's place board about exactly this and in terms of how we do that. Sort of an example of that as well was then discussed at the September board around community frailty services. I know it's in the chair's update as well in terms of the frailty hub, but we also have, as Martin's mentioned, the SEND hub, we have the mental health hub, and all of these hubs, the family hubs as well, are all examples of this community-based integrated model that we will be taking forward. And on behalf of the ICB, Place is the delivery vehicle for that. That's not something that you could do at scale. It's got to be done locally and driven forward, and the York Health and Care Partnership will be taking that role. And you can see there in terms of the example provided in the papers, the power of strengthening the connection between multi-agency services and some of the impacts that we've seen for our frail elderly population. There's some great statistics there for those people who love numbers. And just to throw another one at you, the number of actual occupied bed days that this frailty service has saved is equivalent to one hospital ward. So really, really significant when you actually aggregate that up and the impact that we are able to make. And given the ageing population, that might not be about removing wards from the hospital, but what it is about is conserving the need for future wards to be added. As we know, we have a landlocked hospital, so that's not so easy to expand. So great work there. And the next item around the September meeting was a discussion about the York Joint Committee establishment, and there's been a recent item at the Scrutiny Board for health, I think last week now, so very, very recent. So again, members will be potentially familiar with what this is all about. It's really the next step in our partnership. We've been an established partnership for 2 years under the ICB, but prior to that, there was a very well-established alliance as well of providers with the CCG and City York Council. The next step of that is then actually formally delegating duties, including financial resources from the commissioners, ICB and council, to create that joint committee. In and of itself, it doesn't change anything. You know, it doesn't have a direct impact on patients unless we choose it to. So this is about creating that vehicle to make decisions about planning, particularly around allocation of resources. Where do we choose to prioritise, recognising that every decision to spend a penny is a penny not spent somewhere else. And increasingly, we absolutely will be in a space of making very difficult decisions about trade-offs. And if we want to spend more, for example, in children and people's prevention, that means potentially taking from another area of spend, which we know there are equally important demands. So very important that we have a mechanism to be able to do that transparently with partners, and you know, by having those partner members around the table, we can make better decisions, more effective decisions that are meaningful to the York population and York communities. So we'll see how that goes. York has led the way, and all 6 places now are set to form joint committees as part of the ICB. So across the North East and Yorkshire region of integrated care boards, I think we're probably leading the way actually in terms of place-based decision making, and generally ICBs can feel very centralised and generally are in quite a lot of parts of the country. So in terms of the northern region, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, North East and North Cumbria, and now Humber and North Yorkshire, we are kind of setting a different path. So really, really positive. Legal documents are being drawn up for that, so we'll be expecting to take some formal approvals in March 25. But essentially, the discussion in September was about, do we move forward with this or do we not? It was, and the decision was very much that we do, and that work is continuing. I'm conscious of time. Eating into discussion time. We have a regular assurance report that comes through where we are able to discuss progress against our place priorities, but also about NHS services as well. I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but there is one example in there around the work that we've done linked to the neurodiversity report that we heard earlier, which is about the partnership for inclusion of neurodiversity in schools. And just to add on that particular project, that's due to finish in March this year, and that work with in collaboration with City of York Council and the ICB will be instrumental in terms of how health supports children going forward. So that was the September meeting. I'm not sure how we managed to get through it all in 2.5 hours, but we did. The subsequent meeting was about something called radical place leadership. You know, I think we are a city of rebels. I think a city of radicals in terms of the work that we do in terms of being really ambitious for our population. And really, this conversation was about learning from some other areas. Wigan being one. The Wigan deal that people may have heard about started with the Rebel Alliance, as I understood it, and that work then was taken forward into Gateshead, where they saw some. This was really about how do you empower frontline staff to be able to do the right thing. So what we're so generally obsessed about in our sector-based silos is getting better at doing the wrong thing, getting better at meeting eligibility criteria and referring or not referring, and productivity and efficiency, the bottom line, as people might say. But so often that is preventing us doing the right thing for people, for residents as they present. You know, a child with asthma cannot be, their needs cannot be met by a GP, a clinician, if the housing is poor. So it was really about making those connections and recognising the work that the partnership needs to do as leaders to empower frontline practitioners across healthcare, prevention, voluntary sector, statutory sectors to be able to do the right thing, which is very easy to say and very, very challenging to do. And you can't find many places that have succeeded, but there is an ambition to do so in York, and we'll be taking that forward into our priorities for next year. The November Executive Committee meeting, there were a number of items discussed. The minutes aren't available, as I've said. Just some brief comments. I think the one that I would want to highlight here was the partner report. So we've been doing an item on each sector, the state of the nation for each sector within York in terms of the financial challenges and efficiencies, and really importantly, gathering up the system opportunities. As we move to being a joint committee, we really need to understand and get underneath the challenges that each provider faces. This time we heard, I think we had the summary report, but also the voluntary sector, state of the sector report, which was received, and I think will be underpinning through our joint commissioning work that we are doing now, underpinning changing the way that we commission with the voluntary sector, not only in health but with across health and care. And again, how do we as commissioners enable the sector to do the right thing for people through the commissioning mechanisms that we have? So that will inform our plans as well for April for 25-26. December, another committee workshop again as we get to grips with what joint committee operating means, really around how we operate together as members and what's different. So there'll be more to report, I'm sure, on that in subsequent health and wellbeing boards as we move to a different way of operating. Again, subject to approval, so just put that caveat. The Population Health Hub, I won't go into. I think we've just had a really helpful discussion in terms of the linkages and the importance of using that Population Health Hub as an asset to help us prioritise and make good decisions for our communities. And there is an appendix in the pack as well, which just serves to illustrate the Winter Directory of Services, which we did for the first time last year and was welcomed by partners. So that was produced again and published on both Council and ICB's website, and it's included just for information. Finally, the Mental Health Partnership, just to touch on again, so some key highlights highlighted here. I think one area that I would just like to highlight is that we did hold the first meeting of a Children and Young People's Mental Health Partnership Group, which I think there will be some exciting things happening this year in the children and young people's domain around mental health partnerships. So further progress will be reported in due course, and we've got a dedicated item for the place board tomorrow. We'll be hearing much more about the work of the mental health partnership and how we put the work of the hub on a sustainable footing. So there you go. There's a whistle stop of everything that we've been up to, and happy to take 5 minutes of questions. Apologies.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor Runciman.
Thank you. Back on the mental health hubs, and you know that's always been a priority of mine. I'm worried about the money running out. Do they put a time limit on it? And if you haven't got the second hub established, do they take it all back again? Or or do they leave you with an open-ended commitment that the funding, or have you got it already, of course?
That's an easy one.
Oh, good.
So no, they don't take it back. There might be something in the small print, but let's not talk about that. No, the money is with us, and there are very detailed plans with recruitment underway. Certainly wouldn't be recruiting without the money in the bank, as so to speak. So the money is there for 2 years. So the question comes, how are we embedding and finding a sustainable model? Because if we don't answer the question of what's next, there will be no money, and services will simply go back to how they were, which would be absolutely criminal, and we must not allow that to happen. So certainly I had the conversations with the co-chairs of the Mental Health Partnership yesterday, myself and Sarah Story, the Director of Adult Social Services, about this exact point. Michael and I, Brian Cranach Tube, have had a number of conversations about this as well. So we have to pretty soon, actually, and this will come through the discussion at the place board tomorrow, in terms of seeking assurance for a path to a sustainable model, which has to be about fundamentally changing the way we deliver services, because core services, core commission services, we have to support them to change, to work differently. Back to that point we made earlier about organisation development, frontline teams working differently, being able to be supported to do the right thing. So yeah, that will be a key priority.
Final comment, Chair. I hope that eventually you'll be able to bring us an opening date. And I hope that after that, you'll be able to tell us about the third one in a different area of the city.
Yeah, so yeah, there's an awful lot of work going on just to make real what Sarah's talking about there, in terms of the council working with Tube, working with community voluntary sector around what's the future state going to look like. Because you're right, it's a 2-year funding, but the aspiration for all of us is that the services for mental health we have in the city move to a neighbourhood model of working, and really use all the different assets within the neighbourhood to support the people that we serve. And that means fundamentally changing the way in which we work, our staff, where we organise ourselves, the roles that we do. So yes, there's been a number of events. We're going out and doing some recruitment, which is out there and now. So we're spending the money to make it happen. Yeah, I'm really optimistic about it. I think Hub 3 is something which I think we need to probably want to really understand about the hub model, is that we'll never have a hub which will take all of the people who work in mental health within the city. The hubs are the places which help coordinate all the activity within the area. So the location of them, the actual building, is significant to a certain extent, but really it's the transformation of the way in which we work and the way in which we organise ourselves in terms of that team around the person, which is really, really crucial. So I was in a workshop with our staff around how adult social care takes what we do in terms of our responsibilities and folds in that. The same workshops happening in the Tube tomorrow. We're then in the joint one where all of that then comes together. We're seeing NHS England, I think next week. Is that right? Was it this? So it's moving apace, is what I'd say. There's a whole lot of energy behind it. I'm very optimistic.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. We'll move on to item number 9, which is York's Joint Local Health and Wellbeing Strategy 2022 to 32, review progress and future action planning. Peter, you're going to present this report, and we have 15 minutes for the presentation and discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So talked about the first thing we have to do as a board, a strategic needs assessment, and the second thing we have to do as a board now, which is write a joint health and wellbeing strategy. We did this in 2022, and we set it for 10 years because a lot of the language in the strategy really emphasised the fact that health doesn't predominantly come from clinical care, it comes from society, and society does sometimes take a long time to change. So we set ourselves aspirations around a 10-year vision for a city which would be healthier, and that health would be fairer, and essentially that we would be the healthiest and the fairest city in the north of England in 10 years' time, which is meant to be our big aspiration for the city. And alongside that, the idea that we'll be a health generating city. So not just a city that, you know, knows where the gym is and eats fruit and vegetables, but actually that really does support through every aspect of its functioning, health as a core priority. So this report is 2 years into that strategy. And it's 2 years because we wrote an action plan and we said, we have a 10-year strategy, but we'll do our action plan in 2-year chunks. And so this report really reports back after 2 years. Each health and wellbeing board, we have had a focus on one of the different goals within the strategy, and there are 10 of those goals. And what I've done in this report, and Tracy as well has supported in writing this, has done a great job pulling together some of that work, is give you an update on 2 things: how we've done in terms of what does the data tell us, and how we've done in terms of what are the actions been. The annex shows things that look like this, so a set of graphs, and we've tried to sum it up with 10 graphs, which is hugely reductionist in some ways because there's stories behind all of these, but I think it's for me, it is quite helpful to sometimes have fewer rather than more pieces of data, and actually to say these are the top level things we're trying to influence. And there's a mix of good and bad news in terms of how as a city have we done against the 10-year strategy. So our overarching goal was about life expectancy and healthy life expectancy. Neither of those indicators have really shown much of a shift in a couple of years. And in some ways, we find ourselves on a bit of a turning point where since the Second World War, as a city, we've seen increasing life expectancy and decreasing amount of time people spend in ill health. And around the beginning of last decade, that started to become static and has started to decline. And there are some male and female differences in there, which the report pulls out too. So for me, that's in the category of bad news. Our smoking rates are in the category of good news. Our anxiety and happiness are a mixed picture because we seem to be getting slightly better results when it comes to happiness, but slightly worse when it comes to anxiety. Our alcohol stats are remaining broadly both static and slightly concerning when it comes to mortality and when it comes to admissions. Our childhood obesity stats are similar to where they were and quite high. Our adult obesity stats are still climbing, and I still find it quite incredible that only a third of the city's adults live in the range that we would call a healthy weight. Our ethnic inequalities, our other types of inequalities have been harder to measure, and we have had one measure in there around an inequality when it comes to severe mental illness and mortality, again, which is declining and is quite concerning. A 4 times ratio for mortality for those who have a severe mental illness is not something to be hugely proud of as a city. But I would say that was meant to always be a very broad indicator about inequalities. The problem is getting data on some of the groups that we might want to work into that. So some of that has to be narrative. Our suicide rate, we saw fewer suicides in the most recent year than we've seen in probably around 10 to 15 years, which is good, but it's still a very high number, and it comes off the back of a decade of higher numbers. So actually it may just be that unfortunately numbers can vary from year to year, but we still have higher rates. Some of our diagnosis gaps are improving when it comes to major long-term conditions. Some are staying similar, and our dementia diagnosis rate is still very stubborn and similar. Our physical activity rates are very high, and I think it's important to say that compared to other cities. And our loneliness stats, we have a real difficulty in understanding the data on loneliness, but particularly when it comes to social care and social care users and carers, actually, we are not necessarily heading in the right direction. Point 11 talks about the actions, and I won't go through these in detail, but on average, we've seen between sort of 3 and 5 substantial actions on each of these goals. The extent to which they have made the difference or not is harder to judge, but I would like board members to be assured that we have at least had a level of grip on 28 actions that I feel quite quietly proud about compared to other health and wellbeing boards I have been involved in other cities, for which setting clear actions and then following them up over a longer period of time and understanding have we done things is actually less frequent than one might imagine. So I think we've done well to do that, but the extent to which we can say these have made a difference still remains to me unclear. And so we come to the last bit of the paper, which is what next? In the next 2 years, are we going to follow the same approach? Broadly, for me, there were 3 options. We could say these 28 actions, we've not gone far enough on them. We need to do more on these. We want to keep on with the same set of actions. That's option A. Option C is to take a totally different approach and say, actually, we don't want actions around these, I guess, fairly public healthy goals. We might want to say, have some actions around the life course. So some start well actions, some live well actions, some age well actions, or we might want to take a different approach entirely. So that's for me, option C is to take a different approach. Option B, which is a personal preference, but very, very happy to receive some people's feedback and we can work with whatever the board wants to do, is to agree with the leads of each goal area, set of actions, which could continue what's already been achieved, because there are some areas in which I don't think we've really set out with the actions we've really ticked the box, but also introduce some new actions in, keeping approximately the same 2 or 3 actions per goal, which give the board a sense that things are happening, but also a sense of realism. This board doesn't come with huge amounts of resource. Tracy very ably enables us to be in a room with the right papers and the right agenda in front of us and work and function well as a partnership, but it's not a resource that is able to make these actions happen on a day-to-day basis. It is partnership willingness and it's our resolve as partners. So what do we want to do with these? Do we want to set, for me, I think a set of realistic things which we know we can achieve, and in that sense, know that in 2 years' time we'll be able to say that we've done some significant things. So I'll pass over to the board for comments on where we've got to and what the approach should be over the next 2 years.
Thank you, please, sir. So just to note that it is to delegate the development of the new action to both you and Tracy, and then just draw attention to the options you've just been through on page 282 and the recommendations that we can consider. Does anybody like to make any comments?
The B seems very sensible. It splits it up and everybody's not trying to do everything. So I would agree with the suggestion and the recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so everyone is in agreement that it's option B. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we can now move on to item 10, which is the report. So I have picked out a couple of things within this to look at, just to focus on. I think probably best of all, what I'll focus on first from my report is what I reported on around pharmacy provision, as Councillor Nelson did discuss concerns around pharmacy provision in the particular area she lives in, which does revolve around a application to move a pharmacy and concerns in the area about a reduction in pharmacy hours. Now, we know that pharmacies are absolutely invaluable and they play a massive, massive part, and everything is leaning towards having more pharmacy provision around it. While there has been some statements publicly that the hours won't change, this is still a concern and could lead to a loss of provision. There's also concerns around one of the pharmacies previously, as a lot of pharmacies do provide in supervised consumption and needle exchange, and having worked in those areas, it can be incredibly tricky to get pharmacies to agree to providing those services, which are absolutely vital for people with many, many vulnerable needs. So I did make a statement in response to this reduction in hours and provision, and we will continue to monitor this. And even maintaining one 72-hour pharmacy in this area would still be a loss of hours overall if the actual number of pharmacies are to reduce. But I am really keen that talks are getting underway at the moment with the government to give the pharmacies assurance for funding arrangements going forwards, because that is a big concern at the moment. And just to mention, the pharmacies online survey, the PNA, was launched this week around opening hours. Pardon?
Please respond.
Yeah, please respond around, because that's all around hours, services, what is provided. It's open till the 2nd of March if people want to respond, and you can get copies as well as online, but there's also them in libraries around all around York. Yeah, so just to say we really value pharmacies and would really like people to respond to the survey and encourage other people that they're working with, particularly people who are valuing those services in their community, to use it. Sian, did you want to say something?
I just want to reassure you, we've already shared it through our bulletin to people, but I also wanted to just remind people of the report we did last year looking at pharmacy provision. And actually in that, there was a data table that showed the number of pharmacies in York that had moved from being 100-hour pharmacies when that was allowed to manage the challenges pharmacies were facing. And it also pulled out a lot of the background of why pharmacies are struggling so much financially now. And I think if you haven't read it, if you haven't kind of absorbed the messages from pharmacies about the challenges they face, and that was before the changes to NI, which I know are hitting some of our smaller employers quite badly, it's really important to just kind of avail yourself of the opportunity to learn about exactly what's going on for them, because it is a really tough time. And I'm delighted to see there is some movement nationally, but it's a really concerning aspect. So yeah, we should be encouraging everybody to talk about their pharmacy provision, what matters to them, and hope to see a national settlement soon.
And I think as we move forwards in communities, and so many people have mentioned today, Sarah's mentioned a lot about the neighbourhood model, that pharmacies become so integral to being part of the communities and the provision that's provided there. Yeah, I was going to talk a bit more about the neighbourhood model because it's been discussed so much and just raised so much, and about the high demand for health and care services that have never ever been higher in our services, in our community, sorry, with services being so overstretched, and we've seen that some inequalities are widening and the cost of living continues to rise. As Sarah said, we absolutely need reform. We need to switch from a reactive service to a model of a system where community-based teams share information across the whole community for the benefits of people, and co-design support, which is going to address the needs of different neighbourhoods and communities. This does exist already in some of our hubs, which have been, and I know you said we both mentioned Frailty Hub, but that has been so effective that I think that it's worth highlighting. And it reduces the pressure on the health and care systems, making savings to those who need it and most provided with care. Co-design and health and trying to reach people as soon as possible is so important, and prevention to reduce more costly long-term interventions and encourage people to seek support and be involved with their communities as soon as possible. Okay, does anyone else have any comments or questions they wanted to make on my report? No? Any urgent business? Agenda item 11? No? Okay, I'll bring the meeting to a close, but I just wanted to say one thing, that the beginning part of this meeting and some of the stuff mentioned has been really emotional for people tonight and really triggering. So I'd just like to say to everyone on the board, the speakers, people watching at home, take care of yourselves and look after yourselves. Thank you.